This is what happens when you don't follow the rules in my classroom.
What's happening here?
The sound of fabric tearing echoed through the silent classroom. 30 pairs of eyes watched in horror as Miss Patricia Henderson's fingers tightened around 14-year-old Maya Richardson's collar, yanking hard enough that the seams gave way. A button clattered across the floor. Maya stood frozen, her body rigid with shock as gasps filled the room. Patricia's voice cut through the tension like a knife. This is what happens when you don't follow the rules in MY classroom. But as Maya stood there, humiliated in front of her entire class, her torn uniform hanging from her shoulders, none of them knew the storm that was about to break through those doors. None of them had any idea who Maya's father was. And they were about to find out. To understand what happened that day, you need to know who Maya Richardson really was. Just that morning she'd woken up at 5:30, the same time she did every day. In the small but immaculately kept home she shared with her father near the military base, Maya had stood in front of her mirror, carefully ironing every crease out of her Whitmore preparatory uniform. The navy blazer had to be perfect. The white shirt spotless. The plaid skirt, pressed with precision. She'd learned this attention to detail from her father, a man who believed that excellence wasn't just expected, it was required. As Maya buttoned her blazer, she caught sight of the photograph on her dresser. Her mother, beautiful and smiling, stared back at her from a frame that Maya dusted every single day. 3 years. It had been 3 years since cancer had stolen her mother away, 3 years since Maya's world had shattered into pieces that she and her father were still trying to put back together. Maya touched the frame gently. "I'm going to make you proud, Mom," she whispered. "I'm going to make both of you proud." Maya wasn't just any student. She was on the honor roll. Every assignment turned in early. Every test scored in the 90s. She loved science with a passion that lit up her eyes whenever she talked about chemical reactions or the laws of physics. Her teachers at her old school had called her brilliant, destined for greatness. But now, standing in front of that mirror, Maya felt the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. 2 weeks. She'd only been at Whitmore Prep for 2 weeks, transferred because of her father's reassignment to the nearby base. 2 weeks of trying to find her place in a world that felt like it had no space for her. Whitmore Preparatory Academy wasn't just any school. It was the kind of place where senators sent their children, where doctors and lawyers and CEOs paid $40,000 a year for the privilege of that prestigious name on a diploma. The building itself looked like something out of a movie, all stone columns and manicured lawns, with a fountain in the courtyard and an auditorium that rivaled most theaters. The students drove cars that cost more than most people's houses. Their uniforms were tailored, their phones were the latest models, and their futures were already mapped out at Ivy League universities. And Maya? Maya was one of only 5 black students in the entire school. 5 out of nearly 800. She felt it every single day, that weight of being different, of standing out in a sea of faces that didn't look like hers. At lunch, she'd sit at the corner table, eating the sandwich her father had packed for her while other students laughed in their tight-knit groups. She'd hear the whispers when she walked by, see the way conversations stopped when she approached. Maya told herself it didn't matter. She told herself that if she just followed every rule, if she just worked twice as hard, if she just kept her head down and her grades up, eventually she'd earn their respect. She'd met Principal Westbrook on her first day. He was a tall man with silver hair and a permanent expression of stern disapproval, the kind of man who spoke about the school's reputation the way others spoke about religion. "Whitmore Preparatory has maintained its standing for over 100 years, he told Maya and her father during the tour. "We expect nothing less than excellence from our students. Excellence in academics, excellence in behavior, excellence in appearance. Our standards are high because our students' futures demand it." Maya had nodded, determined to meet every single one of those standards. She had no idea how impossible that would become. 3rd period English. Maya had checked her uniform 3 times before walking into Miss Patricia Henderson's classroom. The skirt length was exactly as specified in the handbook, 2 inches above the knee. She'd measured it herself that morning with a ruler, just to be absolutely certain. Her shirt was tucked in, her blazer buttoned, her shoes polished until they gleamed. Everything was perfect, or so she thought. Miss Patricia Henderson was 52 years old and had been teaching at Whitmore for 15 years. She wore her iron gray hair in a bun so tight it seemed to pull at the corners of her eyes, and she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who saw the world in absolute terms of right and wrong, with no room for gray areas in between. She taught Shakespeare and Dickens to generations of Whitmore students, and she prided herself on maintaining what she called proper standards of conduct and appearance. In her classroom there was order. In her classroom there was discipline. In her classroom she was in absolute control. Maya had barely taken 3 steps into the room when Ms. Henderson's sharp voice stopped her cold. Maya Richardson. The entire class fell silent. 29 students who'd been chatting and pulling out their books suddenly froze, their eyes swiveling between Maya and their teacher. Maya's heart began to pound. "Yes, ma'am," she responded quietly, respectfully, exactly the way her father had taught her. Miss Henderson's eyes traveled slowly down Maya's uniform, her lips pressing into a thin line of disapproval. "Your skirt," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's inappropriate." Maya felt her face grow hot. Every eye in that classroom was on her now. She could feel their stares like physical touches, some curious, some uncomfortable, some almost gleeful at someone else being singled out. "Ma'am," Maya said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands, "my skirt is regulation length. It's 2 inches above the knee, just like the handbook says." She even turned slightly, showing the small tag sewn into the waistband, the one that marked it as an official Whitmore uniform purchased from the school's approved vendor. Miss Henderson's face hardened. "Don't talk back to me, young lady. I've been teaching here for 15 years. I know what regulation looks like, and that," she pointed at Maya's skirt with obvious disgust, "is not it. Go to the office and change into something appropriate." The injustice of it burned in Maya's chest. She hadn't done anything wrong. She'd followed every rule, checked every detail, done everything right. And now she was being humiliated in front of everyone for something that wasn't even true. "Ma'am, I don't have anything else to change into," Maya explained, fighting to keep her voice respectful. "This is the only uniform I have with me, and it does meet the guidelines. I measured it myself this morning." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Miss Henderson took a step toward Maya, her eyes flashing with something that looked almost like satisfaction. "So not only are you violating dress code, but now you're refusing to follow direct instructions? That's insubordination, Miss Richardson." Maya felt panic rising in her throat. This was spiraling out of control. How had following the rules turned into this? "I'm not trying to be insubordinate," she said, her voice barely above a whisper now. "I just haven't broken any rules. Please, if you check the handbook." But Miss Henderson wasn't listening anymore. What happened next would change everything. Miss Henderson's face flushed red, a deep angry color that spread from her neck to her cheeks. Her voice rose, sharp and cutting, filling every corner of that classroom. "I will not be disrespected in my own classroom by a student who thinks the rules don't apply to her." She crossed the distance between them in 3 quick steps, and before Maya could react, Miss Henderson's hand shot out and grabbed Maya's arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. Maya's instinct was immediate and automatic. She pulled back, trying to free herself from the painful grip, her body responding before her mind could catch up. And that's when Miss Henderson's other hand reached up and grabbed the collar of Maya's blazer. Maya felt the fabric pull tight against her throat. She heard the seam straining. And then, with a sickening ripping sound that seemed impossibly loud in the frozen silence of that classroom, the collar tore away. A button flew through the air, bouncing once, twice, 3 times on the floor before rolling to a stop near the front row of desks. The classroom became a vacuum. No one breathed. No one moved. Maya stood there, her blazer hanging awkwardly from her shoulders, the torn collar exposing her white shirt underneath. Her eyes filled with tears, hot and shameful, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't give anyone that satisfaction. But her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold onto her books. Miss Henderson stepped back, her expression shifting from anger to something that almost looked like triumph. "Now you'll have to go change," she said, her voice cold and satisfied. "Out of my classroom. Immediately." Maya bent down with trembling hands and gathered her books, trying to hold together the torn pieces of her blazer at the same time. The walk to the classroom door felt like miles. She could feel every single eye on her back, could hear the whispers starting even before she reached the hallway. As the door closed behind her, shutting her out into the empty corridor, Maya finally let herself look down at the damage. The collar was completely torn, hanging by just a few threads. The button was gone, lost somewhere in that classroom that had witnessed her humiliation. Maya's vision blurred as the tears she'd been holding back finally escaped, rolling down her cheeks in hot streams. She leaned against the cold wall, trying to catch her breath, trying to understand what had just happened. She'd done everything right. Everything. And it hadn't mattered at all. With shaking fingers, Maya pulled out her phone. She stared at her father's contact for a long moment, her thumb hovering over his name. He was busy, she knew. He had important meetings, important responsibilities. But as she stood there in that empty hallway, her uniform torn, her dignity shredded, Maya realized she needed her dad. She needed him more than she'd needed anyone since the day her mother died. She started typing, "Dad, something happened at school. My uniform got torn. I'm okay, but..." Her finger hovered over the send button. What would he think? Would he be disappointed that she couldn't handle things on her own? Would he think she was weak? Maya took a deep breath, remembering something her father had told her once, words that echoed in her mind now. "Baby girl," he'd said, his hand gentle on her shoulder, "being strong doesn't mean facing everything alone. Being strong means knowing when to ask for help." She hit send. Before we continue with what happened next, what do you think Maya should have done in that moment? Have you or someone you know ever been treated unfairly by someone in authority? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to see how Maya's father responds when he finds out what happened to his daughter, make sure you're subscribed, because what's about to happen next will leave you speechless. This general didn't climb to his rank by backing down from injustice, and when he walks through those school doors, nothing will ever be the same again. Maya pushed through the door of the girls' bathroom, her vision still blurred with tears she was desperately trying to control. The fluorescent lights reflected off the white tiles, harsh and unforgiving, as she stumbled to the sink and gripped the cold porcelain edge. She couldn't look at herself in the mirror. Not yet. Not while her blazer hung in tatters, not while the evidence of her humiliation was right there for anyone to see. She turned on the faucet, letting the cold water run over her shaking hands, trying to wash away the feeling of Miss Henderson's fingers digging into her arm, the sound of that fabric tearing still echoing in her ears. Her phone was still in her hand, the unsent message to her father glowing on the screen. Maya read it again. "Dad, something happened at school. My uniform got torn. I'm okay, but what?" But her teacher had assaulted her in front of the entire class? But she'd been humiliated for following the rules? But she didn't know what to do? Maya's thumb hovered over the delete button. Maybe she should just handle this herself. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe if she just went to the office, explained what happened calmly and rationally, they would understand. They had to understand, right? But then another voice echoed in her mind, her father's voice from just that morning. They'd been sitting at the breakfast table, Maya pushing scrambled eggs around her plate, nervous about another day at Whitmore. Her father had noticed the way he always noticed everything. He put down his coffee and looked at her with those intense dark eyes that had commanded soldiers in combat zones halfway around the world. "Maya," he'd said, his voice gentle but firm, "I know it's hard being one of the few who look like us in that school. I know you feel like you have to prove yourself every single day." She'd nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Baby girl, look at me." When she did, she saw understanding there and something that looked like old pain. "The world isn't always fair to people like us. You're going to have to work twice as hard to get half as far. That's not right, but it's reality. But here's what you need to remember. You are brilliant, you are worthy, and you belong in any room you walk into. Don't ever let anyone make you feel less than. Twice as hard to get half as far." The words burned in Maya's mind now as she stared at her reflection. She'd done everything right, worked harder than anyone, followed every rule to the letter. And it hadn't mattered. She'd still ended up here in a bathroom trying not to fall apart. Was reporting this just going to make things worse? Would they think she was being difficult, causing trouble, playing the victim? Maya's internal struggle was a war between everything she'd been taught about standing up for herself and the crushing fear that speaking up would only paint a bigger target on her back. She was about to delete the message when the bathroom door swung open. Maya quickly wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself, but it was too late. A girl walked in, a junior Maya had seen around school but never spoken to. She was black, one of the only other black students at Whitmore, with her hair in neat braids and an expression that shifted from casual to concerned the moment she saw Maya's face. "Oh my God," the girl said, her eyes widening as she took in Maya's torn uniform. "What happened to you?" Maya opened her mouth to say she was fine, to brush it off, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, to her horror, a sob escaped her throat. The girl rushed over, gently touching Maya's shoulder. Hey, it's okay. I'm Jasmine. Jasmine Foster. You're Maya, right? The new freshman?" Maya nodded, trying to get control of herself. Jasmine's eyes traveled to the torn collar, and something dark flashed across her face. "Who did this to you?" Maya's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Miss Henderson. She said my skirt was too short, but it's not. I measured it, and when I tried to explain, she grabbed me and..." She couldn't finish. She didn't need to. Jasmine's expression had gone from concern to furious. "Henderson," Jasmine said, and it wasn't a question. It was a statement filled with recognition and anger. That woman is a menace. Maya, listen to me. This isn't the first time she's done something like this. Maya looked up, confused. What do you mean? Jasmine glanced at the bathroom door, making sure they were alone, then turned back to Maya with intensity burning in her eyes. 2 years ago, my brother was a student here. He was a senior, on track for valedictorian, had gotten into Yale early admission. One day, Henderson accused him of plagiarizing an essay. She had no proof, just a feeling that his writing was too sophisticated for him to have written it himself. She reported him to the administration, and even though he proved the work was his, he had all his research notes, his drafts, everything, it didn't matter. The accusation alone got him removed from the running for valedictorian. It derailed his scholarship opportunities. My parents tried to fight it, but the school closed ranks around her. Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. Nothing happened to her? Jasmine's laugh was bitter. Nothing. They transferred my brother to another teacher, called it resolved, and that was it. My parents pushed back, but Principal Westbrook made it clear that if they kept making noise, my brother's college recommendations might suffer. So they backed down. We all did. And Henderson just kept teaching, kept terrorizing students, especially students who look like us. She looked at Maya's torn uniform again. But this is assault. This is different. You have physical evidence. You need to report this, Maya. You need to go to Westbrook right now. Maya felt the weight of that decision pressing down on her. If she reported it and nothing happened, she'd have made an enemy of Ms. Henderson and marked herself as a troublemaker. But if she stayed silent, if she let this go, what did that say? What would her father think? What would her mother have wanted? Maya thought about that photograph on her dresser, her mother's smile, her strength even in the face of the cancer that was killing her. Her mother had never backed down from anything. Maya pulled out her phone, looked at that unsent message one more time, and then made her decision. She hit send. Then she turned to Jasmine. Will you come with me? To the principal's office. Jasmine didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Let's go. The walk to Principal Westbrook's office felt like a march to execution. Maya's heart pounded with every step, Jasmine's presence beside her the only thing keeping her from turning around and running. The administrative wing was quiet, carpeted in deep burgundy, the walls lined with photographs of graduating classes stretching back decades. Decades of mostly white faces staring down at Maya as she approached the heavy oak door with Principal Westbrook's name engraved on a brass plate. Maya raised her hand to knock, and Jasmine squeezed her shoulder once in encouragement. Come in, came Westbrook's voice from inside, clipped and formal. Maya pushed open the door. The office was exactly what you'd expect from a man obsessed with tradition and reputation. Dark wood everywhere, leather-bound books lining floor-to-ceiling shelves, diplomas and awards covering the walls. Principal Westbrook sat behind a massive mahogany desk, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suit immaculate. He looked up from whatever paperwork he'd been reviewing, and his eyes immediately went to Maya's torn uniform. For just a moment, something flickered across his face. Was it concern? But it was gone so quickly Maya thought she might have imagined it, replaced by his usual expression of stern neutrality. Miss Richardson, he said, his tone giving away nothing. What can I do for you? His eyes flicked to Jasmine standing just inside the doorway. Miss Foster, unless this concerns you, I'll ask you to wait outside. Jasmine looked at Maya, who nodded slightly. She could do this. She had to do this. Jasmine left reluctantly, the door clicking shut behind her. Maya stood in front of that imposing desk, suddenly feeling very small, very young, very alone. Sir, she began, her voice stronger than she felt, I need to report an incident that happened in Miss Henderson's class today. Westbrook leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steepling in front of his face, his expression already skeptical. Already defensive. Maya could see it in his eyes, the way they narrowed slightly, the way his jaw set. He'd already decided something before she'd even spoken. Go on, he said, his tone suggesting he was doing her a great favor by listening. Maya took a deep breath and told him everything. How she'd checked her uniform that morning, measured her skirt to make sure it was regulation. How Miss Henderson had singled her out in front of the entire class. How she tried to explain, tried to show the tag, tried to be respectful. How Miss Henderson had grabbed her arm, then grabbed her collar, how the fabric had ripped. She kept her voice steady, stuck to the facts, didn't embellish or exaggerate. Just the truth. When she finished, silence filled the office. Westbrook's expression hadn't changed. He hadn't taken notes. Hadn't asked clarifying questions. He just sat there looking at her with that same skeptical expression, as if she'd just told him an obviously made-up story. Finally he spoke. Miss Richardson, Miss Henderson is one of our most respected teachers. She's been with Whitmore for 15 years and has an impeccable record. Notice he didn't say he'd investigate. Didn't say he'd talk to witnesses. His first response was to defend the teacher. Maya felt something sink in her chest. Sir, I understand that, but... He held up a hand, cutting her off. Let me see this allegedly regulation uniform. The word, allegedly, hit Maya like a slap. She stepped closer to the desk, showing him the torn collar, turning so he could see the skirt length. Westbrook stood, walked around the desk with deliberate slowness, and examined her uniform with an expression of obvious doubt. He pulled a small tape measure from his desk drawer, of course he had one, and measured the distance from Maya's knee to the hem of her skirt. 2 inches exactly. Regulation. But Westbrook's frown only deepened. It does look questionable, he said, his tone suggesting the issue was settled. The fabric might have stretched. Or perhaps you rolled the waistband. Many students do that to make their skirts shorter. Maya felt her face flush with frustration and humiliation. I didn't roll it, sir. It's exactly as it came from the vendor. And even if there was a question about the length, that doesn't explain why Ms. Henderson grabbed me hard enough to tear my uniform. Westbrook's eyes hardened. Are you suggesting that Ms. Henderson deliberately destroyed your property? That's a very serious accusation, Miss Richardson. One that I would advise you to think very carefully about before repeating. The threat was implicit but clear. Back down or face consequences. But Maya had sent that text to her father. She'd crossed the line. There was no going back now. Sir, I'm not accusing her of anything except what happened. She grabbed my arm, then she grabbed my collar, and my uniform tore. There were 30 witnesses in that classroom. Westbrook walked back to his desk, picked up his phone, and pressed a button on the intercom. Mrs. Chin, please ask Miss Henderson to come to my office immediately. He hung up and turned back to Maya with an expression that made her stomach drop. He'd already decided. She could see it. He was going through the motions, but he'd already chosen his side. They waited in tense silence. Maya stood there, her torn uniform on display, while Westbrook returned to his paperwork as if she wasn't even there. 3 minutes later there was a knock on the door. Come in, Westbrook called, and Miss Henderson entered. She'd composed herself since the classroom incident. Her hair was still in that tight bun, her posture still rigid, but she'd put on an expression of wounded dignity. Her eyes met Maya's for just a moment, and Maya saw something cold and calculating there before Henderson turned to Westbrook with a look of confused concern. You wanted to see me, Principal Westbrook? Her voice was steady, professional, nothing like the harsh tone she'd used in the classroom. Westbrook gestured to Maya. Miss Richardson has made some concerning allegations about an incident in your class today. She claims you grabbed her and tore her uniform. The way he phrased it, the emphasis on claims, made it clear he didn't believe a word of it. Henderson's face transformed into a perfect mask of shocked hurt. If Maya hadn't been there, hadn't seen what really happened, she might have believed the performance. Grabbed her? Henderson repeated, her hand going to her chest in apparent distress. Principal Westbrook, I would never put my hands on a student inappropriately. What happened was unfortunate, but it certainly wasn't as Miss Richardson is describing. She turned to Maya with an expression of disappointed sadness. Maya, I understand you're upset, but lying about what happened isn't going to help anyone. Maya felt like she'd been punched. I'm not lying, she said, her voice rising despite her best efforts to stay calm. You grabbed me in front of the entire class. Henderson shook her head slowly, sadly, like a teacher disappointed in a struggling student. What actually happened, Principal Westbrook, is that Miss Richardson came to class in a uniform that was clearly inappropriate. When I asked her to go to the office to change, she became disruptive and disrespectful, arguing with me in front of the other students. I could see she was getting agitated, so I approached her calmly to check if her uniform skirt was actually regulation length. When I reached out to check, she pulled away sharply, and her uniform caught on my bracelet and tore. It was an accident, caused by her sudden movement, but now she's trying to make it seem like I attacked her. The lie was so smooth, so carefully constructed, that for a moment Maya could only stare in disbelief. Henderson was looking at Westbrook with earnest eyes, her entire demeanor radiating sincerity and wounded professionalism. I'm sorry, Maya, she was trying to say to the principal. I know you're new here and still adjusting, but this kind of behavior, making false accusations against teachers, is exactly why I've been concerned about your attitude. Perhaps the transition to Whitmore's high standards has been more difficult than we anticipated. Maya tried to interrupt, tried to defend herself, but Westbrook held up his hand again. Miss Richardson, I've heard enough. He turned to Henderson with an expression of sympathy. Miss Henderson, thank you for clarifying the situation. I'm sorry you've been put in this position. You may return to your class. Henderson nodded graciously, shot Maya one more look of calculated sadness and left the office. Maya stood there in shock, her mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. She told the truth and somehow she was the one being painted as the liar. Westbrook sat back down at his desk and pulled out a form. He began filling it out with methodical precision, his pen scratching across the paper in the silent office. Miss Richardson, he said without looking up, I'm suspending you for 3 days for destruction of school property and insubordination to a teacher. Your father will need to come in for a conference before you can return to classes. Maya felt the world tilt. What? No, you can't, I didn't do anything wrong. Her voice cracked, all her composure finally shattering. I followed every rule. I was respectful. She's the one who grabbed me. She's lying. Westbrook looked up at her with cold eyes. Miss Richardson, I suggest you stop making these accusations immediately. Miss Henderson is a valued member of our faculty with 15 years of exemplary service. You are a student who has been here for 2 weeks. Do you really think anyone is going to believe your word over hers? The cruelty of it, the casual way he dismissed her, broke something in Maya. She stood there, trembling, tears streaming down her face now, and whispered, But I didn't do anything wrong. Westbrook slid the suspension notice across his desk. You can wait in the outer office until your father arrives to pick you up. Give this to him when he gets here. Dismissed. Maya took the paper with shaking hands and walked out of that office in a daze. Jasmine was waiting in the hallway, took one look at Maya's face and knew. He didn't believe you, she said flatly. Maya could only shake her head, unable to speak. She sank into one of the chairs in the waiting area, the suspension notice crumpling in her grip, and pulled out her phone. Her father had responded to her earlier text. On my way. Don't worry, baby girl. I'm coming. Maya had never needed those words more than she did right now. 15 miles away, at the military installation that had been General Marcus Richardson's post for the last 6 months, a very different scene was unfolding. The conference room was filled with officers, maps spread across the table, a strategic briefing in progress. Marcus Richardson stood at the head of the table, all 6 feet 3 inches of him, his 2-star general's uniform pressed to perfection, his presence commanding the attention of every person in that room. At 42 years old, Marcus Richardson was one of the youngest 2-star generals in the Army, a decorated combat veteran with 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. He'd led soldiers through the worst combat zones on Earth, made decisions that saved lives and cost lives, carried the weight of command with a strength that seemed unbreakable. But when his aide, a young lieutenant named Chin, quietly entered the room and approached him with his phone, when Marcus saw his daughter's text message glowing on that screen, every ounce of that legendary composure nearly shattered. His face, usually so carefully controlled, shifted from focused concentration to concern so deep it was almost fear. The officers in the room noticed the change immediately, falling silent. Marcus read the message once, then again. Dad, something happened at school. My uniform got torn. I'm okay, but... The message cut off there, as if Maya had been too upset to continue. Marcus's jaw tightened. His daughter didn't text him during school hours unless something was seriously wrong. Maya was strong, independent, careful not to worry him. If she was reaching out, if her uniform was torn, something bad had happened. Something very bad. Gentlemen, he said, his voice still controlled but with an edge that made several officers straighten in their seats, we'll need to continue this briefing later. I have a family emergency. He didn't wait for responses. He was already moving toward the door, phone in hand, dialing Maya's number. The call connected after 2 rings. Dad. Maya's voice was small, shaky, so different from her usual confident tone that Marcus felt his heart constrict. Baby girl, what happened? Are you hurt? He was walking through the corridors of the building now, his long strides eating up distance, headed for the parking lot. I'm not hurt, I just... And then she was crying, really crying and trying to talk through the tears. Miss Henderson grabbed me and tore my uniform and Principal Westbrook suspended me and I didn't do anything wrong. Dad, I swear I didn't do anything wrong. I followed all the rules and she grabbed me anyway and now they're saying I'm lying and... Marcus stopped walking. His entire body went rigid. Someone had put their hands on his daughter. Someone had hurt her. And then they'd punished her for it. The rage that filled him was white-hot, but his voice when he spoke was deadly calm. That's what 20 years in the military had taught him. The angrier you were, the calmer you needed to sound. Maya, listen to me very carefully. Are you safe right now? I'm in the office. They told me to wait here. Okay. I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Take your time. Don't leave anything out. So Maya told him. Every detail, from entering the classroom to standing in front of Principal Westbrook, from Ms. Henderson's accusations to the sound of her uniform ripping, from trying to defend herself to being suspended for destruction of property. Marcus listened without interrupting, his free hand clenching into a fist so tight his knuckles went white. He asked specific questions the same way he'd debrief a mission. What exactly did the teacher say? Where did she grab you? Well, saw it. What did the principal say? His mind was already working, processing, strategizing. This wasn't just a school incident. This was assault. This was discrimination. This was an adult in a position of power abusing a child and then using that power to cover it up. When Maya finished, her voice hoarse from crying, Marcus said in that calm, controlled voice that his soldiers would have recognized as the most dangerous sound their general could make, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Don't let them intimidate you. I'm coming, baby girl, and we're going to fix this." "Okay," Maya whispered, and he could hear the relief in her voice, the way some of the fear eased just knowing he was coming. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, Maya. More than anything in this world." 20 minutes. Marcus hung up and stood there for a moment in the parking lot, his eyes closed, his breathing controlled. He thought about his own childhood, growing up in South Chicago, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. He thought about the teachers who'd assumed he was stupid because of where he came from, the guidance counselor who'd told him college wasn't realistic for someone like him, the recruiter who'd suggested the military because what else was a poor black kid going to do? He thought about every time he'd had to prove himself, every time he'd had to work twice as hard, every time he'd faced someone who looked at his skin and made assumptions about who he was and what he was capable of. He'd joined the army at 18 with something to prove. He'd earned his commission through ROTC while getting his degree in engineering, had climbed the ranks through sheer determination and excellence that couldn't be denied. He'd led men in combat, made decisions under fire, earned medals and respect and the rank of general. He'd faced down enemy combatants and hostile forces, had stared down the barrel of a gun more times than he could count. And he'd done it all while carrying the weight of being one of the few, of representing everyone who looked like him, of knowing that his failures would be seen as confirmation of stereotypes while his successes would be dismissed as exceptions. And then he'd met Sarah. Beautiful, brilliant Sarah, a doctor who'd volunteered at the base clinic, who'd seen past the uniform and the rank to the man underneath. They'd fallen in love, gotten married, and 4 years later Maya had been born. Those had been the happiest years of Marcus's life. Coming home to his girls, watching Maya grow, teaching her to read and ride a bike and stand up for herself. When Sarah got sick, when the cancer that had been caught too late started eating her alive, Marcus had felt more helpless than he ever had in combat. He'd held her hand through the chemotherapy, watched her waste away, listened to her make him promise in those final days to protect their daughter, to never let the world break Maya's spirit the way it tried to break so many bright, beautiful black children. "Protect our baby," Sarah had whispered, her voice barely audible, her hand so thin in his. "Don't let them crush her light. Promise me, Marcus." He'd promised. He'd sworn it. And now, standing in that parking lot, Marcus felt the full weight of that promise. Someone had put their hands on his daughter. Someone had humiliated her, hurt her, and then punished her for being hurt. And that someone was about to learn a very hard lesson about who Maya Richardson's father was. Marcus got into his car, a sleek black SUV that was practical and unremarkable. He didn't speed. Didn't drive recklessly. He maintained perfect control, hands at 10 and 2 eyes on the road. But if anyone had looked closely, they would have seen his knuckles were white on the steering wheel, would have seen the muscle jumping in his jaw, would have seen the cold fury burning in his eyes. 20 minutes, he'd told Maya. He'd make it in 15. The drive to Whitmore Preparatory Academy gave Marcus time to think, to plan, to channel his rage into something productive. He thought about his wife's dying words, playing them over and over in his mind like a prayer or a battle cry. "Protect our baby. Don't let the world break her spirit." Sarah had known. She'd known what Maya would face, what it meant to be a young black girl in a world that would constantly underestimate her, constantly try to make her small, constantly punish her for taking up space. Sarah had faced it herself her whole life, had battled through medical school where professors assumed she was a diversity admission, had worked twice as hard for half the recognition, had smiled through microaggressions and blatant racism until the day she died. Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He wouldn't let them do this to Maya. He wouldn't let them break her the way the world had tried to break him, break Sarah, break every person of color who dared to excel in spaces that weren't built for them. Not his daughter. Not while he still had breath in his body. The military had taught him many things, but one of the most important lessons was this: you don't win battles by being nice. You win them by being prepared, by knowing your enemy, by having overwhelming force and the will to use it. And Marcus Richardson was prepared to bring overwhelming force to that school. As he drove, Marcus made several phone calls. The first was to his lawyer, a sharp woman named Janet Martinez who specialized in civil rights cases. He gave her the brief version, told her to be ready to file suit if necessary. The second call was to a friend who worked in local news, just to let them know there might be a story developing at Whitmore Prep. The third call was to his commanding officer, explaining he might need some time to deal with a family situation. Every call was calm, professional, methodical. Marcus Richardson going to war wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet and precise and absolutely terrifying. The GPS showed he was 5 minutes from the school. Marcus thought about Maya sitting in that office, probably scared, probably crying, definitely traumatized by what had happened. He thought about some teacher thinking she could put her hands on his child. He thought about some administrator thinking he could sweep it under the rug. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They saw a black girl new to their prestigious school, and they assumed she was powerless. They assumed wrong. Maya Richardson might be 14 years old, might be one of only 5 black students at Whitmore Prep, but she was also the daughter of a 2-star general. And that general was about to remind them that rank meant something, that power came in many forms, and that you don't mess with a soldier's family. Whitmore Preparatory Academy came into view, all its old money grandeur and carefully maintained appearance. Marcus pulled into the circular drive in front of the main building, parking his black SUV directly in front of the entrance. He took a moment, sitting there in the driver's seat, to compose himself. He straightened his uniform, checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. 2 stars on each shoulder. Rows of ribbons on his chest, each one representing a campaign, a battle, a test passed. The Combat Infantryman Badge. The Bronze Star. The Purple Heart. This wasn't just a uniform. It was 20 years of service, 20 years of proving himself, 20 years of earning respect through blood and sweat and excellence. Marcus got out of the vehicle and immediately heads turned. Students walking across the lawn stopped and stared. A couple of parents picking up their children did double takes. You didn't see a 2-star general walking around private schools every day. Marcus was an imposing figure under any circumstances. 6'3", broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that came from leading men in combat. But in his uniform, with his rank clearly visible, with that cold fury burning behind his eyes, he looked like exactly what he was, a force of nature about to be unleashed. He walked through the front doors of Whitmore Preparatory Academy with purposeful strides. The hallways were decorated with the school's history, photographs and plaques and trophies celebrating decades of tradition. Students in their neat uniforms pressed themselves against lockers as he passed, their conversations dying mid-sentence. Teachers stopped in doorways, their eyes widening at the sight of a general striding through their halls like he owned them. Marcus didn't look left or right. He had one mission: get to his daughter. The front office was just ahead. Marcus could see through the glass doors, could see the reception desk, could see Maya sitting in one of the waiting chairs, her torn uniform visible even from here. His daughter. His baby girl. Looking so small and defeated in that chair, her shoulders hunched, her face tear-stained. Something in Marcus's chest cracked, but his face remained impassive. The secretary at the front desk, a middle-aged white woman with carefully styled hair and reading glasses on a chain, looked up as he approached. Her eyes went wide at the uniform, at the rank, at the sheer presence of this man walking toward her with obvious purpose. She stood up quickly, her professional smile faltering. "Sir, can I help you? Do you have an appointment?" Marcus stopped in front of her desk. When he spoke, his voice was calm, controlled, but carried the kind of authority that made grown men stand at attention. "I'm General Marcus Richardson. Where is my daughter?" The secretary's mouth opened and closed. She glanced nervously toward Principal Westbrook's closed door, then back at Marcus. "Sir, you'll need to sign in first, and I can check if Principal Westbrook is available too." Marcus didn't raise his voice. "Didn't have to. I didn't ask if Principal Westbrook was available. I asked where my daughter is." His eyes moved past the secretary and he saw Maya look up. Their eyes met across the office, and the relief that flooded Maya's face, the way she stood up so quickly she nearly knocked over her chair, told Marcus everything he needed to know about how frightened she'd been. The secretary was still stammering something about protocols and procedures, but Marcus was already moving past her desk. "Sir, you can't just..." The secretary reached for the phone, probably to call security, but Marcus was already at Maya's side. He wrapped his arms around his daughter, feeling her shake with sobs against his chest, feeling the torn fabric of her uniform under his hands. "I'm here, baby girl," he murmured into her hair. "I'm here now." He pulled back enough to look at her face to assess her for injuries. No bruises visible, but he could see the emotional damage clearly enough. "Did they hurt you anywhere else?" Maya shook her head. "Just grab my arm. It doesn't hurt anymore. We'll see about that." Behind them, Principal Westbrook's office door opened. Marcus turned, still holding Maya's shoulder, and came face to face with the man who'd suspended his daughter for being assaulted. Westbrook took in the uniform, the rank, the barely controlled fury on Marcus's face, and to his credit, he didn't back down. But Marcus could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the slight widening of his pupils, the way he straightened his own posture unconsciously. "General Richardson," Westbrook said, his tone attempting authority but not quite achieving it. "I'm Principal Westbrook. If you'd like to step into my office to discuss your daughter's suspension." Marcus didn't move. Didn't blink. Just looked at this man who thought he could punish Maya for being victimized and said in that deadly calm voice, "My daughter's suspension?" The temperature in the office seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Let me make something very clear, Principal Westbrook. My daughter isn't suspended. My daughter was assaulted by one of your teachers, and when she reported it, you blamed her. That's not a suspension. That's a cover-up. And it ends right now." Westbrook's face flushed. "General Richardson, I understand you're upset, but there are procedures." Marcus took one step forward. "Just one. But it was enough. Don't talk to me about procedures when you didn't follow a single one of them when my daughter came to you for help. You didn't interview witnesses. You didn't review security footage. You didn't even pretend to take her seriously. You took the word of your teacher over a 14-year-old girl who came to you with torn clothes and asked for help. So no, we're not going to discuss my daughter's suspension. We're going to discuss how you're going to fix this before I make it my personal mission to ensure everyone knows exactly how Whitmore Preparatory treats its minority students." The office had gone completely silent. The secretary was frozen at her desk. Other staff members who'd emerged from back offices stood in doorways, watching. And Maya, still standing beside her father, saw something she'd never seen before. She saw people in power actually looking uncomfortable. Actually looking worried. Because her father didn't look like someone you could dismiss or intimidate or ignore. Her father looked like a storm that had just made landfall, and there was nothing anyone could do now but try to survive it. Before we see what happens next in that principal's office, I need to ask you something. Have you ever had someone stand up for you when you thought nobody would? Have you ever watched justice actually happen instead of just hoping for it? Drop your experiences in the comments, because what's about to unfold in that office is going to restore your faith that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win. And if you want to see this teacher and principal get exactly what they deserve, hit that subscribe button right now, because this general is just getting started, and when he's done, nothing at Whitmore Preparatory will ever be the same again. Marcus Richardson didn't knock on Principal Westbrook's office door. He simply opened it and walked in, his hand still on Maya's shoulder, his presence filling the room like a physical force. What he saw made his jaw tighten even more. Maya had described it, but seeing it was different. His daughter had been sitting in one of those uncomfortable wooden chairs that schools always seem to have, the kind designed to make you feel small and powerless. She looked tiny in it, her shoulders hunched, her torn uniform a visible indictment of everything that had gone wrong. Behind his massive desk sat Principal Westbrook, looking every inch the authority figure in his expensive suit and perfectly styled silver hair. And standing off to the side, her posture rigid with defensive indignation, was Miss Patricia Henderson. The moment Maya saw her father walk through that door, her face transformed. Relief flooded her features so completely that she looked like she might collapse from it, but there was something else there too. Shame. The kind of shame that came from needing to be rescued, from not being able to handle things yourself, from being the cause of her father having to leave work and come fight her battles. Marcus saw it all in that split second, and it broke something in his heart even as it hardened his resolve. His daughter had nothing to be ashamed of. Nothing. And before this meeting was over, everyone in this room would understand that. Marcus's military training was evident in everything about him. The way he assessed the room in seconds, noting the positions of everyone present, the exits, the power dynamics at play. The way he moved to stand slightly in front of Maya, protective but not dismissive of her presence. The way his eyes cataloged every detail of the torn uniform, the tear stains on her face, the trembling in her hands that she was trying so hard to hide. 20 years in the army had taught him to read situations and people, to identify threats and weaknesses, to know exactly where to apply pressure to achieve his objectives. In this situation? He had it mapped out in his head before Westbrook even opened his mouth. But Marcus didn't start with accusations or demands. He turned to Maya, his voice gentle in a way that only she ever really got to hear, and said, "Tell me exactly what happened. Take your time. I want to hear it from you." Maya glanced at Westbrook and Ms. Henderson, both of whom were watching with expressions that clearly wanted her to stay quiet, to not make this worse. But her father's hand squeezed her shoulder once, gently, and she found her voice. With her father standing beside her, Maya's voice was steadier than it had been in Westbrook's office the first time. She walked through the entire incident again, but this time with more detail, more confidence. She described how she'd measured her uniform that morning, how she'd walked into class expecting a normal day, how Ms. Henderson had immediately singled her out. "She called me to the front of the class," Maya said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "She said my skirt was inappropriate. I tried to show her the tag, tried to explain it was regulation, but she said I was talking back. She ordered me to go to the office to change, and when I said I didn't have anything to change into and that I hadn't broken any rules, she got angry." Maya's voice wavered slightly, but she pushed through. "She grabbed my arm first. Art. I pulled back because it hurt, and then she grabbed my collar and yanked it. That's when it tore. In front of everyone." Marcus listened without interrupting, his face a mask of controlled calm that anyone who'd served under him would recognize as the most dangerous state their general could be in. When Maya finished, he turned his attention to the torn uniform itself. He examined it with the same careful precision he'd used to inspect equipment before a mission. He noted the clean tear where the fabric had given way under force, the way the button had been ripped completely off rather than just coming undone, the slight bruising on Maya's arm that was starting to show where Henderson had grabbed her. He pulled out his phone and took several photographs, his movements methodical and deliberate. Each click of the camera shutter sounded like a nail being driven into a coffin. Principal Westbrook had been watching this display with growing discomfort, and he finally decided to try to reassert his authority over the situation. He stood up behind his desk, drew himself up to his full height, and said in his most authoritative voice, "General Richardson, while we certainly appreciate your service to our country, that was as far as he got." Marcus turned to face him, and the look in his eyes made Westbrook's words die in his throat. "Appreciate my service?" Marcus's voice was quiet, controlled, and absolutely lethal. "You suspended my daughter for being assaulted by a teacher. You didn't investigate. You didn't gather evidence. You didn't interview witnesses. You just took the word of your employee over my child and punished her for being victimized. So no, Principal Westbrook, don't talk to me about appreciating my service when you couldn't even be bothered to do your job." The silence that followed was suffocating. Westbrook's face had gone red, whether from embarrassment or anger it was hard to tell. But before he could respond, Ms. Henderson jumped in, her voice high and indignant. "Assaulted? I did no such thing. This is absolutely ridiculous. I have never in my 15 years at this school been accused of—" Marcus turned his attention to her, and the full weight of his gaze made her stumble over her words. "You put your hands on my child without her permission," he said, his voice deadly calm. "You grabbed her hard enough to leave bruises. You destroyed her property. You humiliated her in front of her peers. What exactly would you call it, Ms. Henderson?" Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "I was simply enforcing the dress code. She was being disrespectful and—" Marcus took one step toward her. Just one. But it was enough to make her take an involuntary step back. She was being disrespectful? My daughter, who measured her uniform to ensure it was regulation, who tried to politely explain that she was following the rules, who has been on the honor roll since she started school, was being disrespectful by not immediately obeying an unlawful order based on your incorrect assessment of her uniform? Is that what you're telling me? The tension in that office was thick enough to cut with a knife. Maya stood frozen, watching her father systematically dismantle every excuse, every justification, every lie that had been used against her. Westbrook and Henderson exchanged glances, and Marcus saw it. Saw the unspoken communication, the circling of wagons, the institutional protection kicking in. Marcus decided it was time to move from defense to offense. "I'd like to see the school's handbook, please. The section on dress code specifically." Westbrook hesitated, then pulled a leather-bound book from his shelf, the official Whitmore Preparatory Student Handbook. He handed it over reluctantly as if he already knew where this was going. Marcus flipped to the dress code section and began reading aloud, his voice clear and precise. Female students' skirts must fall no more than 3 inches above the knee and no lower than 1 inch below the knee. Skirts must be purchased from approved vendors and must not be altered. He looked up. Maya, stand up please. Maya stood, and Marcus pulled out the small tape measure he always kept in his pocket, a habit from years of military inspections where precision mattered. He measured from her knee to the hem of her skirt in front of everyone. 2 inches. Well within the regulation 3-inch maximum. He showed the measurement to Westbrook, then to Henderson. 2 inches above the knee. Regulation. The tag here, he pointed to the label inside the waistband, shows it was purchased from Baldwin's school uniforms, which according to page 43 of this handbook is an approved vendor. And there's no evidence of alteration. So on what basis, exactly, was my daughter deemed to be in violation of dress code? Henderson's face was getting redder by the second. It looked inappropriate. The way she was wearing it, it seemed. Marcus cut her off. It seemed what, Ms. Henderson? It seemed like a regulation uniform being worn by a black girl instead of a white one? Is that what made it seem inappropriate? The accusation hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. That's not, I never said, that's a completely unfair characterization. Henderson sputtered. I treat all my students equally. Marcus's expression didn't change. Do you? Then I'm sure you won't mind if we review the security footage from the hallway outside your classroom. Let's see exactly what happened, shall we? Westbrook, who had been trying to find a way back into control of this conversation, saw his opening. I'm afraid there are no cameras in that particular hallway, General Richardson. The incident took place in a part of the building that isn't monitored. It was a lie and they all knew it. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Really? Because when I toured this school before enrolling Maya, you specifically mentioned that the entire building was covered by security cameras. You said it was part of your commitment to student safety. You showed me the security office where all the feeds are monitored. Are you now telling me that was untrue? The look that passed between Westbrook and Henderson in that moment told Marcus everything he needed to know. There were cameras. They knew there were cameras. And they were hoping he wouldn't push the issue. I may have misspoken during the tour, Westbrook said, his voice less certain now. Not all hallways are covered. That particular wing, Marcus pulled out his phone again. Then you won't mind if I verify that with the fire marshal? Because I'm fairly certain that security camera placement is part of the building's safety certification, which would be a matter of public record. Would you like me to make that call right now, or would you like to tell me the truth? Westbrook's face went from red to pale. He exchanged another glance with Henderson, and Marcus saw the exact moment they both realized they were caught. Perhaps I should review the security system inventory, Westbrook said weakly. There may be cameras I wasn't aware of in that section. Marcus didn't smile, but there was grim satisfaction in his eyes. You do that. In the meantime, I'll be documenting everything. He began taking more photographs. The torn uniform from multiple angles. The bruise on Maya's arm. The suspension notice Westbrook had given her. He opened his phone's recording app and began taking Maya's statement again, this time on video, asking her detailed questions and recording her answers. Every word, every piece of evidence, methodically catalogued. What are you doing? Westbrook demanded, alarm creeping into his voice. I'm gathering evidence, Marcus replied calmly. For the lawsuit I'm going to file if this isn't resolved to my satisfaction. For the complaint I'm going to submit to the State Education Board. For the news story I'm going to give to every media outlet in this city about how Whitmore Preparatory treats minority students. I'm documenting everything, Principal Westbrook, because unlike you, I believe in following proper procedures. The threat wasn't even veiled anymore. It was right out there in the open, and Westbrook's face showed he understood exactly what was at stake. The school's reputation, his job, possibly his entire career. That's when Ms. Henderson decided to change tactics. If she couldn't deny what happened, she'd reframe it. Her entire demeanor shifted from defensive to wounded, from angry to afraid. Principal Westbrook, she said, her voice shaking now, I think there's something important we need to consider here. When Maya came into my classroom, she had an attitude that frankly made me uncomfortable. She was aggressive in her responses, combative in her body language. I felt threatened. Marcus's head turned toward her slowly, and the look in his eyes would have made a smarter person stop talking immediately. But Henderson was committed now, desperate. She was intimidating, Henderson continued, warming to her narrative. The way she spoke to me, the way she moved toward me when I tried to address the dress code violation. I was concerned for my safety. That's why I put my hand out to protect myself, and the uniform tore accidentally when she pulled away so violently. It was a master class in manipulation, in flipping the script, in making the victim into the aggressor. It was also exactly the kind of racist dog whistle that had been used for centuries to demonize black children, particularly black girls, as aggressive and threatening. And Marcus Richardson had heard it all before, had faced it himself, had watched it destroy careers and lives and futures. He went very, very quiet. When Marcus Richardson went quiet like that, when his voice dropped and his body went completely still, people who knew him knew to be afraid. "Let me make sure I understand you correctly, Ms. Henderson," he said, each word precisely enunciated. "My 14-year-old daughter, who weighs 110 pounds soaking wet, who is 5'3", who by every account is quiet and respectful, who has never had a single disciplinary incident in her entire academic career, intimidated you? Made you feel threatened? You, a grown woman, a teacher with 15 years of experience, felt you needed to protect yourself from a child." Henderson seemed to realize she'd made a mistake, but she was in too deep to back out now. "It's not about size, General. It's about attitude and," Marcus's voice cut through hers like a blade. "And what, Miss Henderson? What exactly about my daughter's attitude made you feel threatened? Was it the color of her skin? Because I'm having a hard time imagining you feeling threatened by a white student politely explaining that her uniform was regulation. I'm having a hard time imagining you grabbing a white student hard enough to tear her clothes. I'm having a very hard time imagining you describing a white 14-year-old girl as aggressive and intimidating for the crime of standing up for herself." The racism charge was out in the open now, impossible to ignore. Henderson's face went white. "I'm not a racist. I have taught students of all backgrounds and—" But before she could finish her defense, before Westbrook could jump in to try to defuse the situation, there was a hesitant knock on the office door. Everyone in that office turned toward the sound. Westbrook, clearly grateful for the interruption, called out, "Not now. We're in a meeting." But the door opened anyway, and a young Asian American man in his early 30s stepped inside, looking nervous but determined. Marcus recognized him from the faculty photos he'd reviewed when researching the school. Mr. David Chin, third-year English teacher, recent graduate from the State University's education program. Chen's eyes swept the room, taking in the scene before settling on Marcus. "General Richardson?" he said, his voice not quite steady. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think there's something you need to know. Something everyone needs to know." The room went absolutely still. Westbrook stood up behind his desk. "Mr. Chin, this is a private conference. You need to leave immediately." But Chin didn't move. He looked at Maya, sitting there with her torn uniform, and something in his expression hardened with resolve. "With all due respect, Principal Westbrook, I can't do that. Not this time." He turned back to Marcus. "General Richardson, I recorded what happened in Ms. Henderson's classroom. The whole thing. I have it on my phone." The words landed like a grenade. Everyone froze. Maya's eyes went wide. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Was it hope? Vindication? Henderson made a small sound, almost a gasp. Westbrook's face went from pale to ashen. "You what?" Henderson found her voice first, high and sharp with panic. "You were recording students without permission? That's a violation of—" Chin cut her off, his voice stronger now. "My classroom is directly across the hall from yours, Ms. Henderson. My door was open because the air conditioning was broken and the room was stuffy. I heard you raise your voice, heard a student trying to respond respectfully, and I looked across the hall. I saw what was happening and I started recording because I've seen you do this before. I've watched you target certain students, I've heard the complaints, and I've stood by and done nothing because I'm new and I was scared for my job. But not anymore. Not when you're lying about assaulting a child." The air in that office was electric. Westbrook found his voice, trying to reassert authority one more time. "Mr. Chin, you are way out of line. If you have video, I'm ordering you not to show it to anyone. This is a personnel matter that will be handled internally. If you share that video, you will be terminated immediately." It was a threat, clear and direct. Chen's job, his career, his future, all of it on the line. The young teacher swallowed hard, and for a moment it looked like he might back down. But then his eyes went to Maya again, to this child sitting there with her torn uniform, and he squared his shoulders. "I understand, Principal Westbrook. But I can't do that. I won't do that." He turned to Marcus. "Would you like to see the video, General Richardson?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Yes. Please show me." Chin pulled out his phone with trembling hands. Henderson started talking, fast and panicked. David, please, you don't understand what you're doing. This could ruin your career. I'll file a complaint, but Marcus's voice cut through her protests like steel. Miss Henderson, I strongly suggest you stop talking. Mr. Chin, please proceed. Chin tapped his phone screen, and suddenly the small device was playing a video that would change everything. The angle was from across the hall, looking into Henderson's classroom through the open door. The quality wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. Crystal clear. They could see Maya walking into the classroom, see Miss Henderson's immediate reaction, the way her eyes narrowed, the way she called Maya to the front. The phone's microphone had picked up the audio too, somewhat muffled by distance but understandable. Henderson's sharp voice, "Your skirt is inappropriate." Maya's quiet response, "Ma'am, my skirt is regulation length. It's 2 inches above the knee, just like the handbook says." Everyone in Westbrook's office watched in absolute silence as the video played out. They heard Henderson accuse Maya of talking back. Saw Maya try to show the tag in her uniform. Heard Henderson's voice rising, getting sharper, angrier. And then they saw it. Clear as day, impossible to misinterpret. Henderson crossing the space between her and Maya. Henderson's hand shooting out to grab Maya's arm. Maya pulling back, not violently, not aggressively, just trying to free herself from an unwelcome touch. And then Henderson's other hand reaching up to grab Maya's collar. The sound of fabric tearing came through the phone speaker, and everyone in that office flinched. On the video you could see the shock on Maya's face, the gasps from the other students, Henderson's satisfied expression as she said, loud enough for the camera to catch, "Now you'll have to go change. Out of my classroom." The video continued for a few more seconds, showing Maya gathering her books with shaking hands, walking toward the door with her head down while other students stared. Then the video ended and Chin lowered his phone. The silence in that office was deafening. It was the silence of lies being exposed, of carefully constructed narratives crumbling to dust, of people realizing they'd been caught in something they couldn't talk their way out of. Marcus stood perfectly still, his face unreadable, but Maya knew her father well enough to see the fury burning behind his controlled exterior. Westbrook had sunk back into his chair, his face the color of old newspaper. And Patricia Henderson. Patricia Henderson looked like someone who'd just watched her entire world collapse. Her face had drained of all color. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her hands were shaking. Because that video didn't just contradict her story, it completely destroyed it. There was no accident. There was no threatened teacher protecting herself from an aggressive student. There was just a woman in a position of power grabbing a child, tearing her clothing and then lying about it. And now everyone knew. Marcus finally spoke, his voice quiet and controlled and absolutely devastating. "Mr. Chin, please send that video to my phone. And to your personal email. And make several backup copies." Chin nodded, already pulling up the share function. "Yes, sir." Westbrook tried one more time. "General Richardson, I must insist that this video not leave this office. If we can all just calm down and discuss this rationally." Marcus turned to look at him, and the principal actually leaned back in his chair from the intensity of that gaze. "Calm down?" "Principal Westbrook, I am calm. I am extraordinarily calm. But what I'm not is stupid, and I'm not willing to let this be swept under the rug. This video shows clearly that my daughter was assaulted by a teacher under your supervision. It shows that teacher then lied about what happened. It shows that you suspended my daughter without conducting even a basic investigation. So no, we're not going to keep this video private while you figure out how to protect your teacher and your school's reputation." He pulled out his phone, showing the video that Chen had just sent him. "This video is evidence of assault and battery. It's evidence of a civil rights violation. It's evidence of negligence in your duty as an administrator. And unless you start making this right immediately, it's evidence that will be seen by lawyers, the media, the school board, the state education department, and anyone else who needs to understand what happened here today." Marcus looked at each person in that room in turn. Chin, standing tall despite his nervousness, having risked everything to do the right thing. Maya, tears streaming down her face now, but different tears, tears of vindication, of relief, of finally being believed. Westbrook, looking like a man realizing his career might be over. And Henderson, still frozen, still silent, still pale as death. "So here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded thousands of soldiers, someone who'd made life-and-death decisions in combat zones, someone who was not going to be denied. "My daughter's suspension is going to be revoked immediately. Ms. Henderson is going to be placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. You're going to provide me with every document, every policy, every piece of relevant information about how this school handles discipline and discrimination. And you're going to pray that when I'm done reviewing everything, I decide that internal consequences are sufficient, because if I decide they're not, I will make it my personal mission to ensure that everyone knows exactly how Whitmore Preparatory Academy treats its students of color. Before anyone could respond, before Westbrook could try to negotiate or Henderson could try to defend herself one more time, Marcus turned to Maya and Chin. Let's go. We're done here for now. He put his hand on Maya's shoulder, guided her toward the door. Chin followed, still clutching his phone like a lifeline. As they reached the door, Marcus paused and looked back at Westbrook one more time. I'll be in touch about next steps. In the meantime, I suggest you contact your lawyers. You're going to need them. And with that, General Marcus Richardson walked out of that office with his daughter, leaving behind a silence that spoke volumes about guilt, fear, and the reckoning that was coming. But here's what I want to know from you. Have you ever seen someone finally get caught in a lie they thought they'd gotten away with? Have you ever watched justice actually happen in real time? Drop your stories in the comments because what we just witnessed is only the beginning. This video changes everything, but the fight isn't over yet. If you want to see how this school responds now that their lies have been exposed, if you want to see what happens to a teacher who thought she could get away with assault, hit that subscribe button right now. Because the next part of the story is going to show you what real accountability looks like, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. As Marcus walked back into that office with Maya and Mr. Chin, the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. The power dynamic had been completely inverted in a matter of minutes. Where before Westbrook had sat behind his desk like a judge passing sentence, now he looked like a defendant waiting for the verdict. Where before Henderson had stood with righteous indignation, now she sat in one of those uncomfortable chairs, looking small and defeated. Marcus closed the door behind them, and when he spoke, his voice had dropped to that dangerous calm that was somehow more terrifying than shouting ever could be. Let me be very clear about what we just witnessed on that video, Marcus said, his words precise and measured. This is assault. This is battery. This is destruction of property. These are crimes, Principal Westbrook. Not disciplinary matters. Not misunderstandings. Crimes. He paused, letting that sink in. And then, after committing these crimes against a minor, Ms. Henderson lied about what happened. She accused my daughter of being aggressive and threatening. She manipulated you into suspending the victim instead of protecting her. That's not just incompetence. That's complicity. Westbrook had found his voice again, and he was trying desperately to regain control of a situation that had spiraled completely out of his hands. General Richardson, let's not be hasty here. I understand you're upset and you have every right to be, but I'm sure we can resolve this internally. We can have Ms. Henderson issue an apology, we can provide counseling for Maya, we can. Marcus's laugh was short and completely devoid of humor. Internally? You want to resolve this internally? He took a step closer to Westbrook's desk. You suspended my daughter for being attacked. You took the word of your employee over a child who came to you for help. You didn't investigate, didn't interview witnesses, didn't review security footage that you knew existed. And now that you've been caught, now that there's video evidence proving everything you did wrong, you want to handle this internally? The question hung in the air like an accusation. What exactly would internal resolution look like, Principal Westbrook? Would it look like the resolution you gave Jasmine Foster's brother 2 years ago when Ms. Henderson accused him of plagiarism with no evidence? Would it look like whatever happens to the other students Ms. Henderson has targeted over the years while you look the other way? Would it look like protecting your teacher and your school's reputation while the victim gets to live with the trauma of being assaulted and then blamed for it? Westbrook had no answer. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out that could possibly justify what Marcus was describing. That's when Patricia Henderson started crying. Real tears streaming down her face, her shoulders shaking with sobs. This is insane, she said through her tears, her voice breaking. I'm being attacked. I've devoted 15 years to this school, 15 years to my students, and now I'm being treated like a criminal because of one incident that's being completely blown out of proportion. She looked at Westbrook with desperate eyes. You know me. You know I would never deliberately hurt a student. This is a witch hunt. I'm the victim here. Can't you see that? It was a performance and not a particularly good one. The tears were real enough, but they were tears of self-pity, tears of someone facing consequences for the first time in their life and not knowing how to handle it. Marcus didn't even look at her. His attention remained fixed on Westbrook. I want the school board involved. Now. Westbrook shook his head, trying to assert some remnant of authority. That's not necessary, General Richardson. As principal, I have the authority to handle disciplinary matters involving staff. Bringing in the board would be an escalation That's exactly what this situation requires, Marcus finished for him. An escalation. Because you've proven you can't be trusted to handle this fairly. He pulled out his phone, checked the screen, and a small, grim smile touched his lips. But actually, that's not going to be a problem. I contacted the school board 45 minutes ago, while I was driving here. I sent them the video Mr. Chin provided, along with a detailed summary of what happened to my daughter. They're on their way. Should be here in about 15 minutes. The color drained from Westbrook's face. You contacted the board? Before even speaking with me? Marcus's expression didn't change. Yes. I also contacted my attorney. And I reached out to several local news outlets who might be interested in a story about discrimination and assault at one of the area's most prestigious private schools. I believe in being thorough, Principal Westbrook. It's a habit I developed in the military. When you identify a threat, you don't wait to see if it goes away on its own. You mobilize every resource at your disposal to neutralize it. Westbrook's composure, that carefully maintained veneer of administrative authority, finally cracked. You had no right to do that. This is a school matter, it should be handled through proper channels. You can't just... Marcus's voice cut through his protests like a blade. Proper channels? You mean like the proper channels my daughter tried to use when she came to your office and you suspended her? Those proper channels? No, Principal Westbrook. Those channels are broken. They're designed to protect people like you and Ms. Henderson, not children like Maya. So I'm using different channels. Channels that actually work. Henderson was still crying, but now there was anger mixing with the self-pity. This is going to destroy me, she said, her voice rising. My career, my reputation, everything I've worked for. Over one mistake. One moment where things got out of hand. Don't I deserve a second chance? Doesn't forgiveness matter? Marcus finally turned to look at her, and the expression on his face was colder than ice. Did you give my daughter a second chance when she tried to explain her uniform was regulation? Did you show forgiveness when she came to this office and told the truth about what you did? No, Miss Henderson. You doubled down on your lies. You called a 14-year-old child aggressive and threatening to cover up your own actions. So don't talk to me about second chances and forgiveness when you've shown none yourself. The wait for the school board was tense and silent. Westbrook sat at his desk, occasionally picking up his phone as if to make a call, then putting it down again. Henderson had stopped crying and was now staring at the wall with the hollow expression of someone realizing their world was ending. Maya sat close to her father, still processing everything that had happened, still trying to believe that she was actually being believed, that someone was actually fighting for her. Mr. Chin stood near the door, looking nervous but resolute, checking his phone every few minutes as if expecting a termination notice to arrive at any moment. That's when there was a knock on the office door, and before anyone could respond, it opened to reveal Jasmine Foster, the junior who'd found Maya in the bathroom. But she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a woman in her mid-40s, dressed in an immaculate burgundy suit, her hair in professional locks, carrying a leather briefcase that practically screamed attorney. The woman's eyes swept the room, taking in the scene with the quick assessment of someone trained to read situations, and when her gaze landed on Marcus, something like relief and satisfaction crossed her face. General Richardson, she said, her voice cultured and confident. I'm Diana Foster, Jasmine's mother. I'm also an attorney specializing in education law and civil rights. When my daughter called and told me what was happening, I knew I had to come. She extended her hand to Marcus, who shook it with a firm grip. Diana turned to look at Westbrook and Henderson, and her expression hardened. I'm glad someone finally stood up to them. I should have done it myself 2 years ago, but I was too afraid of what it would cost my son. Marcus's attention sharpened. 2 years ago? Diana nodded, setting her briefcase on Westbrook's desk without asking permission, the gesture itself a subtle power move. My son Jonathan Foster was a senior here. Brilliant student, on track for valedictorian, already accepted to Yale on early admission. And then Miss Henderson accused him of plagiarism. She looked at Patricia with barely concealed contempt. She had no evidence. No proof. Just a feeling that his writing was too sophisticated for someone like him. When we challenged it, when we provided all his research notes, his drafts, his citation trail, everything that proved beyond any doubt that the work was his own, it didn't matter. The accusation alone was enough. Diana opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I tried to file a formal complaint with the school board. I documented everything. Email chains showing Ms. Henderson's bias. Witness statements from other students who'd been targeted. Patterns of discriminatory behavior going back years. And do you know what happened? She looked at Westbrook now, her eyes blazing with old anger. The board swept it under the rug. They said there wasn't enough evidence. They said Miss Henderson was a valued teacher. And then, Principal Westbrook, you called me into your office and very politely, very professionally, threatened my son's future. Westbrook's face had gone pale. I never threatened anyone. I simply pointed out that, Diana's voice cut through his denial like steel. You pointed out that Jonathan's college recommendations were pending. That his scholarship applications required teacher input. That making accusations against respected faculty members could be seen as troublemaking, and colleges don't like troublemakers. That was the word you used. Troublemakers. So I backed down. I let it go. I told myself I was protecting my son's future, that one fight wasn't worth jeopardizing everything he'd worked for. And I've regretted it every single day since. She slid the folder across the desk to Marcus. This is everything I collected 2 years ago. Every email. Every witness statement. Every piece of documentation showing a pattern of discriminatory behavior by Ms. Henderson and negligent oversight by this administration. I kept it all, hoping that someday I'd have the courage to use it. Today is that day. Marcus opened the folder, beginning to flip through pages of evidence that painted a damning picture of systematic bias and institutional protection of that bias. Before he could fully process what he was seeing, there was another commotion outside the office. The door opened again, and this time 3 more parents entered, 2 black women and 1 Latino man, all looking angry and determined. The first woman, in her 30s with natural hair and fire in her eyes, spoke first. My name is Keisha Williams. My daughter Brianna was a student here 3 years ago. Was because we had to transfer her after Ms. Henderson's class gave her such severe anxiety she couldn't sleep at night. The second woman, older and wearing scrubs as if she'd come directly from her shift as a nurse, added, I'm Patricia Santos. My son Miguel got AC in Ms. Henderson's class despite having A's on every single assignment. When I questioned it, she said his attitude in class had affected his grade. His attitude. He sat quietly, turned in perfect work, and got punished for having an attitude she didn't like. The Latino man, well-dressed and clearly educated, stepped forward. Carlos Mendez. My daughter Sophia graduated last year, but only after enduring 2 years of microaggressions and subtle harassment from Ms. Henderson. We didn't speak up because we were told that making waves would hurt Sophia's chances at good colleges. We stayed silent, and I hate myself for it. He looked at Marcus with something like hope and guilt mixed together. When word got out this morning about what happened to your daughter, when people started talking about a general coming to the school, we knew we had to finally say something. We had to stop being silent. Marcus looked at these parents, at the pain and regret and determination on their faces, and something crystallized in his mind. This wasn't about one incident. This wasn't about one teacher having a bad day. This was systematic. This was a pattern of behavior that had been protected and enabled for years. This was how many children damaged? How many futures affected? How many families made to feel powerless? Diana Foster was pulling more documents from her briefcase. The other parents were sharing their stories, talking over each other in their urgency to finally be heard, and Marcus realized the scope of what he was dealing with had just expanded exponentially. How many others are there? He asked Diana quietly. She met his eyes with grim understanding. That I know of personally? At least a dozen students over the past 5 years. And those are just the ones whose parents were willing to talk to me. Who knows how many others stayed completely silent, afraid to even share their experiences. Marcus turned to look at Henderson, who seemed to be trying to disappear into her chair, and Westbrook, who looked like he was calculating how bad this was going to get for him personally. This is bigger than I thought, Marcus said, more to himself than anyone else. This isn't one incident. This is institutional discrimination. This is a civil rights violation on a massive scale. 20 minutes later, the school board arrived, and Westbrook's office was far too small to contain everyone who needed to be there. They moved to the conference room, a large space with a massive table and leather chairs that had probably hosted countless meetings about budgets and policies and strategic planning. Now it was hosting something very different. 5 board members filed in, looking uncomfortable and confused, clearly not entirely sure why they'd been summoned so urgently. They were a mixture of demographics, Marcus noted. 2 white men, 1 white woman, 1 black man, and leading them, an elderly Asian woman whose very bearing commanded respect. This was Margaret Chin, and Marcus had done his research on the drive over. Margaret was 72 years old, a retired federal judge, known for her stern demeanor but also for her unwavering commitment to justice and fairness. She'd been on the Whitmore board for 20 years and had a reputation for not tolerating nonsense from anyone, regardless of their position or influence. If there was anyone on this board who might actually ensure real accountability, it was her. The board members took their seats, and Margaret sat at the head of the table, her eyes sweeping the room and taking in the unusual assembly. Maya and Marcus, Diana Foster and the other parents, Mr. Chin, Principal Westbrook and Ms. Henderson, both looking like defendants waiting for sentencing. Jasmine Foster standing against the wall, having refused to leave. Principal Westbrook, Margaret said, her voice carrying the authority of decades on the bench, your message said there was an urgent matter requiring the board's immediate attention. What exactly is going on? Before Westbrook could formulate a response that would minimize the situation, Marcus stood. Ma'am, my name is General Marcus Richardson. My daughter Maya is a student here. I requested this meeting because she was assaulted by a teacher this morning, and when she reported it, she was suspended instead of protected. I have video evidence of the assault, witness testimony, and documentation of a pattern of discriminatory behavior that suggests this is not an isolated incident. The board members shifted in their seats, exchanging glances. Margaret's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. That's quite an accusation, General Richardson. I assume you can substantiate these claims? Marcus pulled out his phone and connected it to the conference room's display system. Within moments, Mr. Chen's video was playing on the large screen at the front of the room, large enough that every detail was visible. The board members watched in silence as the incident unfolded. Henderson calling Maya out. Maya trying to explain. Henderson grabbing her. The fabric tearing. Maya's humiliation. When the video ended, silence filled the room. Marcus didn't wait for them to process. He methodically presented everything. The torn uniform and the measurements proving it was regulation. The bruise on Maya's arm. Maya's own statement given on video. The suspension notice she'd been given. And then Diana Foster stepped forward with her folder of documentation from 2 years ago. The other parents shared their stories, their voices getting stronger as they realized they were finally being heard. Mr. Chin explained why he'd felt compelled to record and come forward despite the risk to his career. By the time all the evidence had been presented, the pattern was undeniable. Ms. Patricia Henderson had, over the course of years, systematically targeted students of color. She'd accused them of plagiarism, dress code violations, attitude problems, and various other infractions that were either fabricated or grossly exaggerated. She'd failed students despite excellent work. She'd humiliated them in front of their peers. She'd created a hostile environment that had damaged their education and their mental health. And the administration, led by Principal Westbrook, had protected her every single time. They dismissed complaints, threatened parents, and prioritized the school's reputation over student welfare. Patricia Henderson finally found her voice, standing up with desperate energy. This is outrageous. This is a coordinated attack against me because I maintain high standards in my classroom. I refuse to lower the bar just because it makes some students uncomfortable. I treat all my students equally, and if certain students struggle to meet expectations, that's not discrimination, that's accountability. Her voice was getting higher, more frantic. I'm being targeted here, can't you see that? I'm being made into a scapegoat because I won't compromise academic excellence. These accusations are completely fabricated, and that video, she pointed at the screen, that video doesn't show assault. It shows a teacher trying to enforce dress code and a student pulling away violently. It was the same defense she'd used before, but now, with all the evidence laid out, it rang hollow. One of the board members, a wealthy white man in his 60s named Richard Benson, who Marcus had learned was a major donor to the school, leaned forward. I have to say, while the video is certainly unfortunate, students these days can be quite difficult. I'm not saying Ms. Henderson handled it perfectly, but we should consider that Maya might have done something to provoke this reaction. Teachers are under tremendous pressure, and sometimes. Marcus's military bearing, which had been rigidly controlled throughout all of this, cracked slightly. Not much. Just enough. His voice when he spoke was quiet, but it carried an edge that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. Are you suggesting, Mr. Benson, that my 14-year-old daughter deserved to be assaulted? That there's some behavior that would justify a grown woman grabbing a child hard enough to tear her clothing? Please enlighten me. What exactly could Maya have done that would make this acceptable to you? Benson backpedaled immediately, his face reddening. No, of course not. I'm not saying she deserved it. I'm simply suggesting that we should consider all factors before rushing to judgment against a teacher with 15 years of exemplary service. Marcus leaned forward, his hands flat on the conference table. 15 years of targeting minority students while the administration looked the other way. That's not exemplary service, Mr. Benson. That's 15 years of institutional racism being protected because people like you value reputation over justice. The accusation hung in the air, undeniable and damning. Benson looked like he wanted to argue, but Margaret Chen's voice cut through the tension. Mr. Benson, you will be quiet. General Richardson, please continue. Marcus straightened, his composure back in place. I've presented the evidence. The assault is documented on video. The pattern of discriminatory behavior is documented through multiple witness statements and parental complaints. The administration's failure to address these issues is documented through the school's own records of how these complaints were handled. The question now is what you're going to do about it. Margaret took the folder Diana had provided and began reading through it with methodical care. She watched the video again, and then a third time. She read Maya's statement. She examined the photographs of the torn uniform. She reviewed the documentation of previous complaints. The other board members watched her, waiting, knowing that Margaret's judgment would carry enormous weight. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Margaret set down the papers and looked directly at Patricia Henderson. Ms. Henderson, Margaret said, her voice carrying the weight of judgment, based on the evidence presented here today, I am recommending that you be suspended from your position immediately, pending a full investigation into your conduct. This suspension will be with pay as per your contract, but you are to have no contact with students, no access to school grounds, and no involvement in school activities until the investigation is complete. Patricia's face went white. You can't do this to me. I have rights. I have a contract. Margaret's expression didn't change. Yes, you do have rights and they will be respected throughout the investigation. But the students in this school also have rights, including the right to an educational environment free from discrimination and abuse. Those rights take precedence. Richard Benson tried one more time to intervene. Margaret, surely we don't need to be so drastic. Perhaps a reprimand, some additional training? Margaret turned to him with a look that would have frozen lava. Mr. Benson, I am recommending Ms. Henderson's suspension. If you wish to argue against that recommendation, you are welcome to call for a vote. But I suggest you consider very carefully whether you want your name on record as voting to keep a teacher who assaulted a student on video in contact with children. Benson closed his mouth and sat back in his chair. No vote was called. Margaret turned to Maya, and her stern expression softened slightly. Miss Richardson, on behalf of this school board, I apologize for what happened to you today and for the administration's failure to protect you. Your suspension is immediately reversed. It will be expunged from your record as if it never happened. You will receive a formal written apology from the school. And I personally assure you that we will conduct a thorough investigation into how this incident was handled and ensure that nothing like this ever happens to another student at Whitmore Preparatory. But Marcus wasn't satisfied. Not yet. With respect, ma'am, an apology and reversing my daughter's suspension is a start, but it's not enough. Margaret raised an eyebrow. What else are you requesting, General Richardson? Marcus stood, his full height and bearing on display. I want a full independent investigation into this school's disciplinary practices. I want data on suspension rates, detention rates, and academic sanctions broken down by race and ethnicity. I want to know if this pattern of discrimination extends beyond Ms. Henderson to other teachers or administrators. I want concrete policy changes to prevent this from happening again. And I want all of this to be transparent and public, not handled quietly behind closed doors. He paused, letting his words sink in. Because here's the reality. If you handle this internally, if you quietly fire Ms. Henderson and move on, nothing really changes. The system that protected her for 15 years remains intact. The administrators who enabled her keep their jobs. The next teacher with bias issues gets the same protection. So no, a suspension and an apology aren't enough. I want structural change. And if I don't get it, I will file a federal civil rights lawsuit, I will contact every media outlet in the state, and I will make sure that everyone knows exactly how Whitmore Preparatory treats its minority students. The threat wasn't veiled. It wasn't subtle. It was right out there in the open, and the board members all understood exactly what was at stake. Margaret Chin studied Marcus for a long moment, her expression unreadable, and then something that might have been approval flickered in her eyes. Your demands are reasonable, General Richardson. The board will convene an emergency session tomorrow to approve the scope of the independent investigation. You have my word that it will be thorough, transparent, and will result in concrete policy changes. We will also review Principal Westbrook's handling of this incident and determine what administrative changes are necessary. She stood, signaling the meeting was coming to an end. Ms. Henderson, you will gather your personal belongings from your classroom under security escort and leave the premises immediately. You will be contacted by the board's legal counsel regarding the investigation. Principal Westbrook, you are placed on administrative leave pending review of your decisions in this matter. An interim principal will be appointed tomorrow. Westbrook looked stricken. Administrative leave? But I've been principal here for 12 years. I've given my life to this school. Margaret's voice cut through his protest. And in that time you allowed discrimination to flourish unchecked. Your legacy, Principal Westbrook, will be determined by this investigation. I suggest you use your leave to consider how you want to be remembered. Security was called. Patricia Henderson was escorted from the building, still protesting, still crying, still insisting she was the victim. But her protests grew fainter as she was led down the hallway, past classrooms full of students who'd seen her finally face consequences, past teachers who'd watched her get away with bias for years, past the very room where she'd assaulted Maya just hours before. Principal Westbrook followed shortly after, his face ashen, his perfect composure finally shattered completely. He didn't protest, didn't argue, just walked out with his head down, knowing his career was likely over. Marcus watched them go, his arm around Maya's shoulders, and felt Diana Foster step up beside him. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Thank you for doing what I should have done 2 years ago." Marcus shook his head. "You did what you thought you had to do to protect your son. I understand that. But maybe we can make sure no other parent has to make that choice." Diana smiled, a fierce expression full of determination. "I'm going to hold you to that, General. And I'm offering my services pro bono to help with whatever comes next. This school needs to change and I want to be part of making that happen." The other parents gathered around, thanking Marcus, sharing contact information, forming the beginning of what would become a powerful coalition for change. Mr. Chin approached hesitantly, still looking nervous about the career consequences he might face. "General Richardson, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I saw things, heard things, but I was scared. I'm still scared, honestly. But watching you fight for your daughter, it made me realize that some things are more important than job security." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "You did the right thing when it mattered most, Mr. Chin. That takes courage. Real courage. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." As the room began to empty, as parents and board members filed out, Margaret Chin approached Marcus one final time. "General Richardson, you're a force of nature. I suspect Whitmore Preparatory has no idea what it's unleashed by crossing you." Marcus's expression was grim. "I'm just a father protecting his daughter, ma'am. Nothing more, nothing less." Margaret smiled slightly. "Perhaps. But you're also a man who knows how to fight battles and win wars. I look forward to working with you to make this school what it should be. And here's what I want to know from you watching this. Have you ever seen someone with power actually held accountable? Have you ever watched an institution forced to change because someone refused to back down? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this fight isn't over yet. What happened today was justice, but real change takes time. If you want to see how this school transforms, how these policies actually get implemented, how Maya rebuilds her life after trauma, then you need to hit that subscribe button right now. Because the final part of this story is going to show you what happens when people refuse to accept the status quo, when they demand better and won't settle for less. Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. The parking lot of Whitmore Preparatory Academy was quiet when Marcus and Maya finally made it to his car. The adrenaline of the confrontation was starting to wear off, leaving behind exhaustion and the weight of everything that had happened. Marcus unlocked the doors and they both got in, the familiar smell of leather and that pine air freshener Maya had given him for Father's Day 2 years ago somehow grounding in its normalcy. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just sat there in the silence, the engine off, the world outside continuing on as if everything hadn't just fundamentally changed. This was the first time they'd been truly alone since the incident. In Westbrook's office, there had been administrators and teachers and other parents. In the conference room, the school board and witnesses and all that evidence being presented. But now, sitting in this car in an empty corner of the parking lot, it was just the two of them. Just a father and his daughter, processing trauma and victory and everything in between. And that's when Maya finally broke. All the composure she'd maintained, all the strength she'd shown while recounting what happened over and over, all the tears she'd held back while watching her father fight for her, it all came crashing down at once. She started crying. Not the quiet, controlled tears from before, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. 14 years old, and the weight of what she'd endured, what she'd survived, what she'd had to be strong through finally overwhelmed her. Marcus didn't say anything at first. He just unbuckled his seatbelt, reached over, and pulled his daughter into his arms as best he could in the confined space of the car. He held her while she cried, one hand on the back of her head, the other rubbing her back in slow circles the way he'd done when she was little and had nightmares. "You did nothing wrong," Marcus said, his voice low and fierce and absolutely certain. "Nothing. Do you hear me, baby girl? Nothing that happened today was your fault. Not one single thing." But Maya was shaking her head against his chest, her words coming out between sobs. "I was so scared, Dad. I was so scared. When she grabbed me, when the principal suspended me, when everyone was looking at me like I'd done something wrong, I thought I'd disappointed you. I thought you'd be ashamed of me for causing trouble, for not being able to handle it myself, for needing you to come rescue me like I'm some kind of child who can't fight her own battles." Marcus's voice cracked then, emotion breaking through his military composure in a way that Maya rarely heard. "You could never disappoint me. Never. Maya, do you understand how proud I am of you? How incredibly proud." He pulled back just enough to look at her tear-stained face, to make sure she could see the absolute sincerity in his eyes. "You stood up for yourself. You knew you were right, and you didn't back down even when they tried to make you doubt yourself. You came to me for help when you needed it, which takes more courage than people realize. And then you stood there in that office and told your truth over and over again, even when they didn't want to hear it. That's not weakness, baby girl. That's strength. Real strength." Maya wiped at her eyes with the sleeve of her torn uniform, trying to compose herself. "But I was so scared," she repeated, her voice small. Marcus nodded. "Being scared doesn't mean you weren't brave. Courage isn't not being afraid. Courage is being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. And that's what you did today." He was quiet for a moment, choosing his next words carefully because he knew how important this conversation was, how much Maya needed to hear this. "Maya, we need to talk about what happened today. Not just the incident itself, but what it represents." He shifted in his seat, one hand still holding hers. "What Miss Henderson did to you, what Principal Westbrook did, that's racism. Not the obvious kind with slurs and hatred, but the insidious kind that hides behind rules and standards and respectability. The kind that sees a black girl and assumes she's breaking the rules even when she isn't. The kind that describes black children as aggressive and threatening for doing the exact same things white children do without consequences. The kind that protects institutions and reputations at the expense of the children those institutions are supposed to serve." Maya was listening intently now, her tears slowing as she focused on her father's words. "I need you to understand something," Marcus continued, his voice heavy with the weight of lived experience. "This isn't the last time you'll face discrimination. I wish I could tell you it was, but I can't. You're a brilliant, beautiful black girl growing up in a world that doesn't always value brilliance and beauty that looks like ours. You're going to encounter people who underestimate you, people who try to make you small, people who see your excellence as a threat instead of a gift." He paused, making sure she was really hearing him. "But you're also going to develop the tools to fight back. And I'm going to teach you those tools the same way I learned them." Marcus started sharing his own experiences then, stories he'd never told Maya before because she'd been too young, because he'd wanted to protect her innocence as long as possible. He told her about being a second lieutenant, fresh out of ROTC, and having a senior enlisted soldier refuse to salute him because, "You don't look like an officer to me." He told her about the time he'd been pulled over 3 times in 1 month while driving near the base, always with the same excuse about a broken taillight that wasn't actually broken. He told her about being passed over for a promotion that went to someone less qualified, less experienced, but the right color. He told her about having to work twice as hard, be twice as good, make half as many mistakes just to be seen as equal. "But I also learned how to protect myself," Marcus said. "I learned to document everything. Every conversation, every incident, every interaction that felt wrong. I learned my rights inside and out so that when someone tried to violate them, I knew exactly what to say and who to call. I learned to pick my battles wisely, to know when to let something go and when to fight with everything I had." He looked at Maya intently. "And I learned that some battles must be fought no matter the cost. Because if we don't fight, nothing ever changes. Today was one of those battles. What happened to you was wrong, and walking away would have told you that your dignity, your safety, your humanity didn't matter enough to defend. I will never send you that message. Ever." Maya was quiet for a long moment, processing everything her father had said. Then she asked the question that had been weighing on her since they'd left that conference room. "Do I have to go back there? To Whitmore?" Her voice was small, uncertain, and Marcus could hear the fear in it. Fear of facing the students who'd watched her humiliation. Fear of walking those hallways where she'd stood with her torn uniform. Fear of being in a place that had failed her so completely. Marcus squeezed her hand. "That's your choice, baby girl. Completely your choice. If you want to transfer, we'll find another school. A better school. A school that deserves to have you as a student." He paused, then added, "But if you want to stay, if you want to see this through and be part of making sure Whitmore actually changes, then we'll make sure it's different. We'll make sure you're safe. We'll make sure you have support. We'll make sure that what happened to you never happens to another student." He tilted her chin up so she was looking at him. "Either choice is valid. Either choice is brave. There's no wrong answer here. What do you want to do?" Maya thought about it, really thought about it. She thought about running away, starting over somewhere else where nobody knew what had happened. But she also thought about Diana Foster's son, about Jasmine's brother, about all the other students who'd been hurt by Ms. Henderson and had no choice but to stay silent or leave. She thought about the other minority students still at Whitmore, still facing bias, still navigating a system that wasn't built for them. "I want to stay," Maya said finally, her voice getting stronger. "I want to stay and make sure this actually changes. I want to make sure other kids don't go through what I went through." "Is that stupid?" Marcus's smile was full of pride and love and a fierce kind of joy. "That's not stupid, baby girl. That's heroic. And I'll be with you every step of the way." The 2 weeks following that confrontation moved with the relentless momentum of a boulder rolling downhill. The independent investigation that Margaret Chen had promised wasn't just thorough, it was devastating in its findings. Teams of investigators descended on Whitmore Preparatory Academy like a military operation. They interviewed students, current and former, dozens of them, creating a safe space for kids who'd been scared to speak up before to finally tell their stories. They interviewed teachers, some of whom had been wanting to report what they'd seen for years but had been afraid of retaliation. They reviewed records going back a decade, looking at every suspension, every detention, every disciplinary action, every grade dispute. The local news picked up the story and it spread like wildfire. "Prestigious private school under investigation for discrimination," read the headlines. News vans parked outside Whitmore's gates. Reporters interviewed parents, students, education experts. The story hit social media and exploded. #Justice for Maya started trending locally, then regionally. People shared their own stories of discrimination in schools, of children being targeted, of institutions protecting bad teachers at the expense of vulnerable students. The support for Maya was overwhelming, but so was the criticism of Whitmore Preparatory. The school's carefully cultivated reputation was being dismantled piece by piece in real time. Other parents started coming forward, emboldened by Marcus's refusal to be silenced. Parents who'd accepted bad grades and unfair punishments because they didn't think anyone would believe them. Parents who'd been threatened with consequences if they pushed back. Parents who'd transferred their children out rather than fight a system that seemed unbeatable. Now they were sharing their documentation, their emails, their stories. The pattern was undeniable. Ms. Henderson wasn't an isolated case. She was the most egregious example, but the bias was baked into the system. A group of students organized a peaceful protest, gathering in front of the school with signs that read, "Protect all students," and "No more silence," and "Justice not just for some." The local news covered it extensively. Jasmine Foster spoke to reporters, her voice clear and strong. "This is about more than one incident. This is about a culture that has tolerated discrimination for too long. We're here to say that culture ends now." The protest was dignified, powerful, and impossible to ignore. Even some white students joined, holding signs that said, "I believe Maya," and "We can do better." The data that came out of the investigation was shocking, even to people who'd suspected bias existed. Black students at Whitmore Preparatory were 8 times more likely to be suspended than white students. 8 times. Latino students were 5 times more likely. And the offenses? Almost never objective violations like fighting or vandalism or cheating that could be clearly documented. Instead, it was always subjective: disrespect, disruption, dress code violations, attitude problems. Violations that depended entirely on how an administrator or teacher interpreted a student's behavior. And the interpretation, the data showed, varied dramatically based on the student's race. White students caught talking in class got warnings. Black students got detention. White students who questioned a grade got conferences. Latino students got accused of being disrespectful. White students who wore uniforms that bent the rules got gentle reminders. Students of color got public humiliation and disciplinary action. The same behaviors treated completely differently based solely on the color of the student's skin. It was systematic. It was documented. It was undeniable. And 3 other teachers besides Ms. Henderson were flagged for showing clear patterns of bias in their disciplinary decisions and grading practices. The school's reputation, built over more than a century, took a massive hit. Donations dropped. Prospective families scheduled tours and then canceled them after seeing the news coverage. Current families started quietly exploring other options. The institution that had prided itself on preparing future leaders was being exposed for teaching those future leaders that bias and injustice were acceptable as long as you maintained plausible deniability. The Whitmore name, once synonymous with excellence and prestige, was becoming synonymous with discrimination and institutional failure. 3 weeks after Maya's assault, the school board called a public meeting to present the investigation's findings and announce their decisions. The auditorium at Whitmore Preparatory was packed beyond capacity. Every seat was filled. People stood along the walls, sat in the aisles despite fire codes. Parents and students and teachers and community members who'd never set foot in Whitmore before but cared about justice and accountability. Media cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking as they recorded everything. This wasn't just a school board meeting anymore. This was a reckoning. Margaret Chin stood at the podium, her presence commanding immediate silence. She didn't use notes. Didn't need to. She'd lived with this investigation's findings for weeks now, and the facts were seared into her memory. "We are here today," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of that packed auditorium, "to present the findings of an independent investigation into allegations of discrimination and bias at Whitmore Preparatory Academy. What we found is disturbing. What we found is unacceptable. And what we found demands immediate and comprehensive action." She laid out the data in clinical detail. The suspension rates. The disciplinary patterns. The documented cases of bias. The students who'd been harmed. The parents who'd been silenced. The culture of protection that had allowed it all to continue for years. The auditorium was silent except for occasional gasps of shock or murmurs of recognition as people heard their own experiences reflected in the data. When Margaret finished presenting the findings, she moved to the decisions. Based on these findings, the board has taken the following actions. Ms. Patricia Henderson has been terminated for cause, effective immediately. Her behavior violated every standard we hold for educators. Her contract has been voided, and she will not receive any severance or benefits beyond what is legally required. There was applause at this announcement, quickly hushed so people could hear the rest. Principal Westbrook has been asked to resign, and he has agreed to do so. His failure to address these issues, his active role in suppressing complaints and protecting problematic teachers, and his decision to suspend a student who came to him for help represent fundamental failures of leadership. He will not serve in any administrative capacity in this district again. More applause, louder this time. Board member Richard Benson has been censured for his attempts to minimize the severity of these issues and his suggestions that students who were victimized somehow bore responsibility for adult misconduct. He has submitted his resignation from the board, effective at the end of this meeting. Margaret paused, letting the weight of these consequences sink in. 3 people who'd held power at Whitmore, who'd seemed untouchable just weeks ago, removed from their positions. But she wasn't done. These personnel decisions, while necessary, are not sufficient. We are implementing comprehensive policy changes designed to prevent these issues from occurring in the future and to create a truly equitable educational environment for all students. She outlined the new policies one by one. Mandatory bias training for all staff, not just a one-time workshop but ongoing professional development. An anonymous reporting system where students and parents could report discrimination without fear of retaliation, with every report tracked and investigated by an independent third party. A diverse hiring initiative to recruit and retain teachers and administrators who reflected the student body's diversity. A student advisory council with real power, not just a symbolic group, but students who would have input on policy decisions and disciplinary procedures. A complete revision of the subjective disciplinary policies that had been used to target students of color, replaced with clear, objective standards that would be applied consistently regardless of race. Every policy change was specific, measurable, and designed to address the exact failures the investigation had uncovered. This wasn't window dressing. This was structural reform. When Margaret finished presenting the changes, she looked out at the audience and said, "We've asked General Marcus Richardson to speak today. His courage in demanding accountability, his refusal to accept easy answers, and his insistence on real change have been instrumental in bringing us to this moment." General Richardson. The applause as Marcus stood and walked to the podium was thunderous. He stood there in his uniform, every inch the two-star general, and waited for the noise to die down. Maya sat in the front row watching her father with pride and love and something like awe. "I'm not a man who speaks publicly often," Marcus began, his voice calm and clear. "I'm a soldier. I'm used to briefing rooms and command decisions, not auditoriums and community forums. But I'm also a father. And 3 weeks ago my daughter was assaulted at this school, and the institution failed her at every level. What I want to talk about today isn't just what happened to Maya. It's what this moment means for every child who walks through these doors." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Whitmore Preparatory Academy says it prepares future leaders. That's on your website, in your brochures, in your mission statement. Future leaders. But what kind of leaders will they be if the lessons they learn here include that bias and injustice go unpunished? What kind of leaders will they be if they learn that power protects itself at the expense of the vulnerable? What kind of leaders will they be if they see discrimination and say nothing because speaking up is too risky?" The auditorium was absolutely silent. The changes being implemented today matter. They matter because they send a different message. They say that all children deserve dignity and safety. They say that adults in positions of power will be held accountable for their actions. They say that institutions can change, must change, when they fail to live up to their stated values. Marcus's voice grew stronger, more passionate. "But policies on paper aren't enough. Culture change requires everyone in this room to commit to doing better. To see bias when it happens and call it out. To believe children when they tell you they've been harmed. To choose justice over reputation, truth over comfort, and the well-being of students over the convenience of adults." He looked directly at the students in the audience now. "To the young people here, I want you to know something. Your voice matters. Your experiences matter. When something wrong happens to you, you have the right to speak up, to demand better, to refuse to accept injustice as normal. Don't let anyone make you small. Don't let anyone convince you that staying silent is safer than standing up. Yes, speaking up takes courage. Yes, it might be hard. But you deserve schools that see your humanity, respect your dignity, and protect your rights. And if they don't, you demand that they do." The standing ovation that followed went on for nearly 2 minutes. People weren't just clapping. They were crying, cheering, embracing each other. It was cathartic, this moment of seeing someone articulate what so many had felt but couldn't express. The following Monday, Maya walked back into Whitmore Preparatory Academy for the first time since the incident. She was nervous, terrified actually, but determined. Her father had offered to walk her in, but Maya had shaken her head. "I need to do this part myself, Dad." So Marcus had watched from the parking lot as his daughter, wearing a new uniform that fit perfectly and hung on her without any tears, walked through those doors with her head high and her shoulders back. The school felt different somehow. Maybe it was the new interim principal, a black woman named Dr. Valerie Martinez, who'd made it her mission to personally greet students at the door every morning. Maybe it was the posters that had gone up announcing the new reporting system and student advisory council. Maybe it was just knowing that the people who'd hurt her were gone, that consequences had actually happened. Mr. Chin was waiting at Maya's locker when she arrived. "Good morning, Maya," he said with a warm smile. "It's good to see you back." Other teachers made similar efforts throughout the day, letting her know they were glad she was there, that they were committed to making Whitmore better. Some were awkward about it, clearly not knowing quite what to say to a student who'd become the center of such a massive controversy. But the effort mattered. The acknowledgement mattered. The students were more complicated. Some treated Maya with a new respect, almost reverence. She'd stood up to the system and won, and that made her something of a hero to kids who'd felt powerless themselves. Others were awkward, not making eye contact, clearly unsure how to interact with someone they'd watched be humiliated and then vindicated so publicly. And a few were resentful. Their parents had been friends with Ms. Henderson, or they felt the school's reputation had been unfairly damaged, and they blamed Maya for it. But Jasmine and the other minority students rallied around Maya immediately, forming a protective circle that first day back. They ate lunch together, walked between classes together, made sure Maya knew she wasn't alone. And surprisingly, some white students approached Maya to apologize. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything that day in class," one girl said quietly at lunch. "I knew what Ms. Henderson was doing was wrong, but I was scared to speak up. I'm really sorry." Maya didn't know how to respond to these apologies at first, but gradually she found words. "Thank you for saying that. Maybe next time we can all speak up together." Within the first week back, Maya did something that surprised even herself. She started a student organization called Equity Now. It began as a small group, just her and Jasmine and a few other students who wanted to make sure the policy changes actually translated into cultural change. They met after school to discuss their experiences, to strategize about how to hold the administration accountable, to create a peer support system for students facing discrimination. The club grew rapidly. Within 2 weeks they had 30 members. Within a month they were the largest student organization at Whitmore. Equity Now became a real force for change in the school culture. They organized workshops on unconscious bias for students. They created a buddy system to help new minority students navigate Whitmore. They worked with the administration to revise the student handbook to make it clearer and more equitable. They brought in speakers, civil rights attorneys, educators, activists, to talk about discrimination and justice and how young people could be agents of change. And Maya, quiet Maya who'd spent her first 2 weeks at Whitmore trying to be invisible, became the face of this movement. She found her voice, her power, her purpose. She was no longer trying to disappear. She was demanding to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. And people were listening. 3 months after the day her uniform was torn, 3 months after her father had stormed into that office and changed everything, Maya stood at a podium in the Whitmore Preparatory boardroom, presenting to the school board about student experiences with the new policies. She'd been invited by Margaret Chin herself, who told Maya that the board needed to hear directly from students about whether the changes were working or just window dressing. Maya had prepared for this presentation the way she prepared for everything. Thoroughly, methodically, with attention to detail that would have made her father proud. She stood there in her uniform, no longer seeing it as a symbol of rules that could be weaponized against her but as something she'd reclaimed. She'd earned the right to wear it. Earned the right to be there. Her voice was confident, articulate, powerful as she walked the board through survey data Equity Now had collected from students. She talked about which policies were working, where there were still gaps, what else needed to change. She made specific recommendations, backed up with evidence, delivered with the kind of poise that made it hard to believe she was only 14 years old. In the back of the room, Marcus sat watching his daughter with tears streaming down his face. He didn't try to hide them or wipe them away. He just watched Maya command that room the way he commanded briefing rooms full of colonels and generals, and his heart was so full of pride it felt like it might burst. He thought about Sarah, about his wife who'd died too young, who'd made him promise to protect their baby. He thought about how Sarah would have loved to see this moment, to see the woman Maya was becoming. And in his mind he heard Sarah's voice from years ago, from when Maya was just 7 and had won first place at the elementary school science fair. "She's going to change the world," Sarah had said, watching their daughter explain her project on solar energy to the judges with enthusiasm and confidence beyond her years. "That girl is going to change the world, Marcus. I can feel it." Marcus had laughed then, delighted but skeptical. "She's 7, Sarah. Let's see if she can change her room first before we worry about the world." But Sarah had been serious, had looked at him with absolute certainty. "I mean it. That girl has something special. She's going to do important things. You'll see." And now, watching Maya present to the school board, watching her advocate not just for herself but for every student who'd ever felt marginalized or powerless or invisible, Marcus whispered what he should have said to Sarah all those years ago. "She already is." The presentation ended to enthusiastic applause. Margaret Chin stood and shook Maya's hand, thanking her for her insights and promising that the board would seriously consider all her recommendations. As the meeting adjourned and people began filing out, several board members approached Maya to tell her how impressed they were, how much they appreciated her leadership, how Whitmore was lucky to have her. Maya handled it all with grace, thanking them while making it clear that the work wasn't finished, that they needed to remain committed to change even when the cameras were gone and the attention had moved to other stories. Finally, Marcus made his way to his daughter. He didn't say anything at first, just pulled her into a hug that said everything words couldn't. When he finally pulled back, he was smiling through his tears. "Your mother would be so proud of you. I'm so proud of you." Maya smiled back, no longer crying herself but feeling that same fullness in her chest. "I learned from the best, Dad." They walked out of Whitmore Preparatory together, Maya in her uniform that had once been torn but was now whole, walking tall with her head high and her father's hand on her shoulder. As they stepped into the evening sunlight, Marcus thought about everything that had happened, everything that had changed, everything his daughter had survived and how she'd turned that survival into purpose. They tried to break her spirit that day, he thought to himself. When Miss Henderson grabbed her, when Principal Westbrook suspended her, when the system tried to make her small and silent and powerless. They tried to break her spirit. Instead, they forged it into steel. Maya would face more challenges ahead. More bias, more discrimination, more people who would underestimate her or try to limit her or fail to see her brilliance. But she'd also carry with her the knowledge that she could stand up, speak out, and demand better. That her voice mattered. That justice was possible. That she deserved dignity and safety and respect, and she didn't have to settle for less. Whitmore Preparatory would continue to change in the months and years ahead. Some changes would stick. Others would require constant vigilance to maintain. The culture shift would be slow, imperfect, ongoing. But it had started. Because one girl refused to accept that being assaulted was normal. Because one father refused to let his daughter be blamed for someone else's crime. Because people who'd been silent found their voices. Because an institution was forced to confront its failures instead of hiding them. The work wasn't finished. The work would never be finished. But it had begun. And that mattered more than anyone realized. This story is fictional, but the discrimination it depicts is happening in schools across the country right now. Right now, students of color are being suspended at dramatically higher rates than white students for the same behaviors. Right now, children are facing bias from teachers who claim to treat everyone equally. Right now, parents are being told to stay quiet to protect their children's futures. Right now, institutions are protecting reputations instead of students. Stand up. Speak out. Believe children when they tell you they've been harmed. Demand accountability from schools and teachers and administrators. Document everything. Know your rights. And understand that change is possible, but only if people refuse to accept injustice as normal. According to the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, Black students are nearly 4 times more likely to be suspended than white students, and Latino students are 1.5 times more likely. These disparities exist at every grade level in every region, regardless of school poverty levels or demographics. The discrimination is real. The harm is real. And the need for people to stand up and fight it is real. If you or someone you know is facing discrimination in school, resources are available. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the ACLU, local civil rights organizations, and education advocacy groups can provide support, guidance, and legal assistance. You don't have to fight alone. And you deserve better. Now I want to hear from you. Has this story changed how you think about standing up against injustice? Have you or someone you know experienced discrimination in school? What would you do if you were in Maya's position or Marcus's position? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it inspired you to believe that change is possible, then hit that subscribe button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Let's start a conversation about how we protect all children, how we demand accountability from institutions, and how we create a world where no child has to fight this hard just to be treated with basic dignity and respect. Thank you for watching.